Microsoft sold you a copy of Windows and then decided that wasn't enough. They needed more data, more ad revenue, and more subscription income. Windows 11 became the platform they quietly transformed to get it. The financial logic behind every ad in your start menu, every forced Copilot button, and every lock screen notification you never asked for traces back to a specific problem Microsoft has with Wall Street. And once you understand that problem, everything that has happened to Windows 11 makes perfect sense. For most of Microsoft's history, Windows was a simple business. Someone buys a PC, Microsoft gets a cut. Someone upgrades their operating system, Microsoft gets a check. It was predictable, it was profitable, and for decades it worked. But something happened in the 2010s that changed everything. Wall Street fell in love with a different kind of revenue, subscription revenue. Not one-time payments, not license fees, monthly or annual income that keeps coming in, quarter after quarter, year after year. Companies with subscription models get higher stock valuations, investors treat them as more stable, more predictable, more valuable, and Microsoft, watching that shift happen, made a very deliberate decision to transform itself. Under Satya Nadella, who took over as CEO in 2014, Microsoft executed one of the most successful corporate pivots in tech history. Azure became a cloud powerhouse. Microsoft 365, the subscription version of Office, replaced the old one-time Office purchase for most users. LinkedIn, the professional network Microsoft bought for $26 billion in 2016, added another recurring revenue stream. The stock price reflected this transformation spectacularly. Microsoft went from being seen as a slow legacy tech company to being one of the most valuable corporations on the planet. But there was a problem, a structural one. Windows itself didn't fit neatly into the new model. When someone buys a laptop with Windows pre-installed, Microsoft collects an OEM license fee from the manufacturer, typically somewhere in the range of a few tens of dollars per device. That's it. Once, then the relationship is basically over. The user runs Windows for 5, 7, sometimes 10 years, and Microsoft sees no more money from that person's use of the operating system itself. Meanwhile, Azure is generating billions in cloud revenue. Microsoft 365 is pulling in tens of billions annually in subscriptions. And Windows, the product that more than a billion people use every day, is stuck in the same revenue model it's been in since the 1980s. From a pure financial perspective, Windows is a massive, undermonetized platform, and that's the lens through which everything that has followed needs to be understood. The situation got considerably more stressful starting in 2022. The post-pandemic PC market collapsed. During the pandemic, demand for laptops and desktops surged as people worked and studied from home. Then, when the world reopened, that surge reversed sharply. In Microsoft's fiscal year 2023, revenue from the more personal computing segment, which includes Windows OEM income, declined significantly. Windows OEM revenue at one point fell 39% year over year. That's not a rounding error. That's a structural revenue hit, and it exposed how dependent Microsoft still was on PC hardware cycles for Windows income. Think about what this means in shareholder terms. Microsoft is a company with a market cap that at various points has exceeded $3 trillion. Investors who own a piece of that company expect growth, not just today, but consistently into the future. When the PC market contracts and Windows OEM revenue falls, someone in that investor base starts asking uncomfortable questions. What is your long-term monetization strategy for Windows? Because right now it looks like you're leaving money on the table with more than 1 billion users and almost no recurring revenue for most of them. That pressure is real. It's not dramatic, and it doesn't happen in a single confrontational meeting. It shows up in analyst reports, in earnings call questions, in private conversations between institutional investors and company leadership. And it shapes corporate decision-making in ways that eventually affect every ordinary user. The first move Microsoft made to extract more value from Windows users was advertising. And it predates Windows 11, it goes back to Windows 10, where Microsoft first began testing what it euphemistically called suggested apps in the start menu. In 2016, a promotional ad for a game appeared on Windows lock screens. Most users thought something had gone wrong with their computer. It hadn't. That was intentional. But Windows 11 took this to a new level. In April 2024, Microsoft rolled out an update, KB 5036980, to all Windows 11 users. With it came promoted apps in the start menu's recommended section. Microsoft described these as coming from a small set of curated developers. What they actually were, in plain language, was paid placements. Ads. In your operating system, in the section of the start menu that sits right alongside your recently opened files. This wasn't the only place. The lock screen, which uses a feature called Windows Spotlight to display background images, also carries promotional content and tips, which, in practice, often means nudges toward Microsoft services or third-party offers. File Explorer, the basic file management tool you use every time you open a folder, began displaying banners pushing OneDrive storage upgrades and Microsoft 365 subscriptions. The Windows search bar surfaces what Microsoft calls search highlights, trending web content, sponsored suggestions, rather than just searching your local machine. The Settings app itself shows promotional recommendations. The Widgets panel, pinned to the taskbar by default, is essentially a newsfeed laced with sponsored content. And Microsoft Defender, the built-in antivirus tool that comes with Windows at no charge, began nudging users toward paid Microsoft 365 subscriptions for enhanced security features. The result is that a user on a fresh Windows 11 installation is bombarded with promotional material from the moment they log in. Lock screen, taskbar, start menu, file explorer, settings, search. Each of these surfaces has been quietly converted into ad space or an upsell funnel. And here's the part that makes users particularly angry: Windows 11. Home costs $139 if you buy it directly from Microsoft. Windows 11 Pro costs more. When your PC manufacturer builds a laptop, they pay Microsoft a license fee, and that cost is passed on to you in the price of the device. You have already paid for this operating system, and then, after paying for it, you see ads. To put a finer point on it, this is not how operating systems used to work. You buy macOS hardware, the OS comes free, and there are no ads in Finder or the dock. Linux distributions have no advertising of any kind. The idea that a paid operating system would also serve its paying users promotional content was, not long ago, considered a violation of an implicit agreement between software makers and their customers. Microsoft has broken that agreement quietly over the course of several years. Then came AI, and with it, an even more aggressive transformation of Windows. In 2023, Microsoft made one of the most consequential bets in its history. The company invested deeply in OpenAI and integrated the technology into its products under the Copilot brand. For enterprise customers, this became Microsoft 365 Copilot, an AI assistant added onto Office subscriptions at an additional $30 per user per month. That's a significant upsell on top of an existing subscription. For investors, it was exactly the kind of recurring premium revenue story they had been waiting for. But the consumer side of Copilot, the version that lives inside Windows 11, doesn't charge users directly. Not yet anyway. So what's it doing there? There are a few answers. First, it drives hardware upgrades. Microsoft created a category called Copilot Plus PCs, devices certified to have a neural processing unit, or NPU, capable of at least 40 trillion operations per second. This is a new hardware requirement that most existing Windows computers cannot meet. By tying its most advanced AI features exclusively to these new devices, Microsoft created a reason for users to buy new hardware sooner than they otherwise would have. New hardware means new OEM license fees. It also means more devices in the Microsoft ecosystem, which supports the broader advertising and subscription upsell machine. Second, Copilot in Windows builds familiarity and dependency for the paid enterprise tier. If a user becomes accustomed to interacting with Copilot on their personal Windows 11 machine, they're more likely to accept and advocate for it in a workplace context, which is where the $30 a month version lives. Third, and perhaps most controversially, some of the AI features Microsoft introduced seem designed to collect more user data than anything Windows had done before. Recall is the clearest example. Recall was unveiled in mid-2024 as a flagship feature of Copilot Plus PCs. The system would take continuous screenshots of everything happening on your computer, every app, every document, every website, and use AI to make that history searchable. Imagine being able to ask your computer, find that invoice I was looking at last Tuesday, and having it pull it up instantly. Microsoft framed it as a productivity breakthrough. The security and privacy community responded with alarm. Security researcher Kevin Beaumont and others quickly demonstrated that Recall stored its screenshot database in a location that was accessible to any application or user with standard permissions, meaning malware could, in principle, harvest everything you'd ever done on your PC. An ethical hacker built a tool called Total Recall that could extract and display the entire Recall database in seconds. The backlash was severe. Recall videos on social media accumulated millions of views, and the overwhelming response was rejection. Microsoft was forced to first delay the feature, then restrict it to opt-in, rather than enable it by default, then delay it again. The feature spent much of 2024 and into 2025 stuck in limited testing, with Microsoft internally reportedly considering the implementation a failure. The Recall episode exposed something important. Microsoft had developed a feature that involved continuous surveillance of user activity, planned to enable it automatically on new devices, and had to be forced by public pressure to make it opt-in. The lesson was not subtle. Without that pressure, Microsoft's default was to collect more. There's a word that's been used to describe what Microsoft is doing to Windows: and it comes from internet culture, enshittification. The concept describes a pattern where a platform gradually degrades the experience of its users to extract more value from them, often in service of advertisers or shareholders. The pattern in Windows looks like this. First, Microsoft offers a clean, functional operating system. Then, because Windows has more than 1 billion users and investors expect growth from that enormous base, Microsoft begins layering in revenue mechanisms. Ads in the Start menu, upsell banners in File Explorer, AI features designed to create new hardware sales and subscription funnels, data collection that enables targeted advertising across Microsoft's advertising network. Each step is incremental. Each new ad service is introduced quietly, buried in a cumulative update that most users never read release notes for. Each new telemetry setting is pre-enabled by default, requiring active effort to turn off. The design is not accidental. It is optimized to maximize revenue collection while minimizing user resistance. And crucially, the user who paid for Windows has very little recourse. You can disable many of these things. Tech publications have published detailed guides requiring users to modify settings across 6 or 7 different menus, edit the Windows registry, and toggle a dozen separate options spread across the privacy, personalization, and search settings. That's the official route to a Windows 11 experience that doesn't bombard you with promotional content. Not automatic, not easy, and always at risk of being re-enabled by a future update. This friction is not a design oversight. Making it hard to opt out is the point. In early 2026, something interesting happened. Reports emerged from Windows Central, one of the most reliable Microsoft-focused publications, citing people familiar with internal plans. Microsoft was reconsidering parts of its AI push in Windows 11. Copilot integrations and apps like Notepad and Paint were reportedly under review. Work on adding new Copilot buttons to additional built-in apps had been paused. Recall was being reevaluated, with Microsoft internally treating the current implementation as a failure. This is genuinely significant. It means the accumulated user backlash from recall, from unwanted Copilot intrusions, from ads in places no one expected ads, had reached a threshold where it was becoming a reputational and business risk. At some point, users migrate. They choose Linux, they choose Mac OS, they stay on Windows 10 well past its October 2025 end of support date, rather than upgrade to an operating system they don't trust. Windows 10 still commanded a substantially larger market share than Windows 11, even 3 years after the newer version launched. Part of that is hardware compatibility. Windows 11 has strict requirements around a security chip called TPM 2.0 that many older PCs don't meet, but part of it is simple reluctance. People saw what was happening to Windows 11 and decided to stay where they were. Microsoft has now signaled it is listening. Whether that listening translates into meaningful, permanent change or into a temporary retreat before the same logic reasserts itself is genuinely unclear. The financial incentives have not changed. The pressure from investors to monetize Windows more aggressively has not disappeared. If anything, with Microsoft spending enormous sums on AI infrastructure and facing investor scrutiny over the pace of returns, the pressure to extract more revenue from the consumer Windows base may intensify. Here is the honest situation. Microsoft is caught between two things that can't both fully be true at the same time. On one hand, Windows works because it is the dominant operating system on personal computers. That dominance depends on users choosing it, trusting it, and recommending it to others. The moment Windows becomes something users actively resent, something they work around, root past, or replace, the foundation starts to crack. On the other hand, Microsoft is a publicly traded company with shareholders who expect the most valuable technology franchise in history to produce growing, recurring revenue. And Windows, in its traditional form, is a one-time sale that does not grow the way cloud services and subscriptions grow. The tension between those two realities is what produced the Windows 11 you have today. Ads in the Start menu, AI features that came before they were ready, a privacy-invasive screenshot tool enabled by default until the public said no, lock screen notifications for things you never asked about, File Explorer banners for services you already decided not to buy. None of this was done because the engineers at Microsoft are malicious. Most of these decisions came from a very ordinary and very recognizable corporate logic. We have 1 billion users. We need to generate more revenue from them. And we're going to add one more monetization layer. Satya Nadella did not set out to ruin Windows. He set out to satisfy shareholders, which is, in the most literal sense, his job. But the problem is that what satisfies shareholders degrades the product that billions of people depend on every day.